Hi, everyone. Judge Andrew Napolitano here for Judging Freedom. Today is Tuesday, February 25th, 2025. Matt Ho is here with us today on the United States is still funding genocide in Gaza. But first, this.
Markets are at an all-time high. Euphoria has set in. The economy seems unstoppable, but the last administration has buried us so deep in debt and deficits, it's going to take a lot of digging to get us out of this hole. Are you prepared? Lear Capital specializes in helping people like me and you grow and protect our wealth with gold. Did you know that during Trump's last presidency, gold rose 54% to a record high? If that happens again, that puts gold at $4,200 an ounce in his next term. Don't wait. Do what I did. Call Lear at 800-511-4620 or go to LearJudgeNap.com for your free gold ownership kit and special report, $4,200 gold ahead. When you call, ask how you can also get up to $15,000 in bonus gold with a qualifying purchase. Call 800-511-4620, 800-511-4620, or go to LearJudgeNap.com and tell them the judge sent you.
Matt Ho, welcome here, my dear friend. Thank you for your time, as always. Is there any military reason why the United States sent bombs to Israel that weigh 22,000 pounds each, so large, so heavy that the Israelis don't even have planes to lift them up off the ground and drop them?
Thanks for having me back on, Judge. Yeah, you're talking about the Moabs, the mother of all bombs, which really don't have much of a use militarily. They're airburst munitions that are designed to destroy structures and people on the ground. They would have no effect against Hamas's tunnels. They certainly have no effect against Iran's hardened structures where they have their nuclear research facilities or their key personnel, underground or within mountains in their bunkers. These things, as you said, are so big that the only thing the Israelis could use to drop them would be a C-130 cargo aircraft, which, could easily be shot down by the Iranians, easily shot down by Hezbollah, possibly. Now, Hamas probably can't shoot down those C-130s. And so the idea, the spectacle of it, using these massive bombs to push Palestinians out of areas that the Israelis want. So it's a weapon of terror. And it's designed for a terror campaign. And so my understanding of how these bombs would be utilized, if they're utilized at all, would be to be utilized against Palestinian people, against the population, in order to terrorize them.
So I guess Donald Trump's proclamation that he's a president of peace applies to Ukraine, but not to Gaza.
It's Donald Trump, Judge. I think most people would agree is a comedic version of Orwell, in the sense his words often have the wrong meanings, or the meanings are upside down or turned inside out. Trump wants what's best for the Israelis. Trump wants what's best for himself, of course, and so he sees what's best for the Israelis as being what's best for himself. He's surrounded by people that are Zionists, certainly his support from the Zionists for his campaign, Miriam Adelson being the chief example of that, giving over $100 million to his campaign last year, but just one of only many examples. He has stated, he's clearly stated, he reiterated it again just a few days ago, that Netanyahu and this Israeli government has his full support and blessing. And so whatever the Israelis want to carry out, Trump views that as being in his best interest as well.
So President Biden signed an executive order. You can't even articulate it with a straight face, prohibiting the American government from selling or causing to be delivered weapons into the hands of those who would use them for other than humanitarian purposes. This obviously wasn't enforced because of all that he gave to Israel. Trump ostentatiously rescinded that order. For what purpose?
I don't know what the
I mean, the order was never followed under the Biden years. The order was superfluous because federal statutes already prohibit that.
Judge, exactly. It'd be like picking out some arcane piece of legislation from the 19th century and now annulling it, something that hadn't been utilized in 150 years. This idea that somehow the United States had been obeying that executive order, let alone the 3 or 4 different federal laws that I'm aware of, as well as subsections of laws or international treaties that we belong to that prohibit the use of American weapons in human rights violations. I mean, for not just Biden, every president in the modern era has violated those federal laws. So as well as, again, the international treaties that we are part of, which according to our Constitution are the law of our land. So I don't know why he chose to do that. But I mean, certainly it may be just to make a point, speculating here, it may to make a point, maybe to put an exclamation mark on the understanding that the Palestinians are not people and the Israelis can do whatever they want. Maybe it's for some reason he's got a lawyer in the White House who thinks this is a good idea just to preclude any lawsuits against him. We just saw the NGO Dawn just yesterday provided over 1,000 pages of documents, I believe, to the International Criminal Court, asking the International Criminal Court to investigate Joe Biden, Tony Blinken, and Lloyd Austin as war criminals. So perhaps it's something to avoid a similar fate, although the dangers of such prosecution are negligible. So I don't know why he brought it up, why they're making it a news item, but because they're going to do, as you said, Judge, whatever they want to do.
Is Benjamin Netanyahu, in your view, determined to wreck the ceasefire or to reintroduce violence and genocide under some pretext?
Yes, absolutely, Judge. And I think that's been the consensus of all of us who've come on your program, that it's just a question of when Israel resumes its military operations in Gaza. By military operations, of course, I mean a genocide, but also as well to Israel's campaigns in Lebanon. Now we've seen over the weekend Israel's statements regarding Syria, where they have said, the Israelis have said, no, the only military allowed south of Damascus in Syria is the Israeli military. And so you can see the Israelis strengthening their position in Syria, as well as trying to pursue unrest in Syria by trying to divide the Druze people from the rest of Syria. But, this resumption of the genocide in Gaza, again, it's always been a question of when, not if. I think for Netanyahu and his cabinet, the political question has been, how many hostages is enough? How many hostages can we get back before we start to begin before we renew the genocide, in a sense of how many of our people do we need to have back home in order to placate the political dissent, the political unrest in this country over the hostages? And how many do we need to leave in Gaza to allow us to have a casus belli, right? A reason for a renewed war, right? So there is this balancing act in Israel, I think, of how many do we get back and say we got our people back versus how many do we leave there in order to allow us to claim the right to begin the genocide again. And I think we're getting closer and closer to that moment.
Here is Steve Witkoff, who's without portfolio. He's not confirmed by the Senate. He doesn't have an official government job, but he's the president's emissary, saying we have to extend the ceasefire, and I'll be in Israel next Wednesday, tomorrow. He since has canceled that trip, but here's what he said about the ceasefire. Chris, cut number 5.
We have to get an extension of phase 1, and so I'll be going into the region this week, probably Wednesday, to negotiate that. And we're hopeful that we have the proper time to finish off, to begin phase 2 and finish it off and get more hostages released and move the discussion forward.
Do you think that Trump will just say to Netanyahu, no more violence, or A, he can't control Netanyahu, or B, if Netanyahu does bring the IDF back into Gaza, Trump will back him up publicly and with military support?
I think it's the latter, Judge. No, yeah, letter C there. I think that's been the case. Again, Trump has said he will support whatever Netanyahu decides to do, and it will be couched, of course, in the terms that Hamas violated the ceasefire. So all the blame will be put on Hamas. The reality of the ceasefire violations, almost all of them coming from Israel, more than 100 Palestinians killed by the Israelis during this ceasefire. Just in the last 24 hours or so, 6 Palestinian children, including newborns, have died of hypothermia because Israel is not allowing in tents, mobile homes, generators, heavy equipment, all the things that the Palestinian people need, not just to rebuild, but just to survive, particularly during this cold, wet time of year. And all the blame, though, will be put on the Palestinians, just looking for an excuse to lay blame on them. And then, of course, I think what you'll hear is, even though Witkoff is saying a mighty strong line now of commitment to a ceasefire, in a week, 2 weeks, a month from now, whenever the ceasefire is dead and over and the genocide has begun again, it will Hamas ruined it and the Israelis had to go back in.
Here's Witkoff also on Sunday. Apparently was on nearly all the Sunday talk shows, so this is a different interview. But to me, what he says here makes absolutely no sense whatsoever, but I invite your comments. Chris, number 6.
The May 27th protocol agreement, signed last May 27th, sets forth that the Phase 2 negotiation is much about 2 things. A permanent ceasefire, a cessation of all violence, and in addition to that, the fact that Hamas cannot be allowed to come back into the government. Mm-hmm. And I think the way you square that circle is that Hamas has to go. They've got to leave. And we're physically the negotiation will be around that. I would say physically, that's correct.
Where would they go? Has any country offered to take them in?
Well, I think the devil is in the details, and we've had a lot of discussions around it. I'm not at liberty to have that discussion, that specific discussion today, but we've got some ideas.
Our friends, Professors Mearsheimer and Sachs, are the progenitors of a theory called realism. How unrealistic is this, that Hamas would voluntarily leave Gaza?
Right. Well, the reality is, Judge, is that Hamas has said it will step aside from power. It has said this continually over the last year. If Witkoff or his people watched Al Jazeera, if they read Middle East Eye, if they read Haaretz, they would know this. And this is where you get into that question, right? Do they just not know these things? Does Witkoff not know these things, or does he simply not care? And it's probably maybe a mix of the two, actually.
But Hamas will step aside if there is a Palestinian state. They won't step aside and leave the poor Palestinian people defenseless in the face of a voracious Netanyahu.
Right, absolutely. And that's, and even say Judge Steve Witkoff finds a magic wand, right? And he's able to make Hamas disappear, and the Hamas leadership and its membership goes away. They evaporate. They go to Mars, wherever. The reality is that Hamas in name doesn't matter. The significance is the resistance. That Hamas right now is the manifestation of resistance to Israeli occupation. So until you address this problem, the main and legitimate and overwhelming grievance of the Palestinian people, that they are being occupied, that they are suffering, they are being oppressed, that their grandparents, their parents, and now they themselves have been put under the thumb of atrocity after atrocity. Until you address that, you're going to have resistance to Israel, regardless of what you call it. You could call it whatever name you want to come up with, and it will still be there. And this is what I worry about. Does a guy like Witkoff actually understand that Hamas is simply just a symptom? It's a manifestation of the resistance to the illegal and oppressive Israeli occupation. And again, I'm worrying that he doesn't even get that.
How do you read Witkoff? I mean, he's American, he's Jewish, he's a Zionist, he's fabulously rich, he's a longtime friend, personal friend, business collaborator with Donald Trump. He can't be an intermediary. On the other hand, it appears that he twisted Netanyahu's arm behind his back because the Israelis eventually accepted a plan which they had rejected 7 months earlier under the Biden administration.
And he's a busy man, Judge. He doesn't just have this portfolio. He has the Ukraine. He's involved with the Ukraine-Russia negotiations, the larger Russia negotiations, as well as potentially negotiations with Iran. He may not be going to Israel next week because potentially, here I speculate, maybe he's going to Iran. I have no idea if that's the case, but it could happen, right? I mean, so it's a good thing that there is somebody who is talking to our, quote, enemies, unquote. And I think people would agree you could put the Israelis in that category as well in terms of what true American interests are. But the thing about Witkoff, I fear, is that, again, he doesn't understand the human elements involved here, the historical, metaphysical aspects of what's occurring in these conflicts, right? He is a man who has been successful through business, and he's always able to get one transaction done after another, like his boss, Donald Trump, because of the structures of which within which they operate. But here now they are dealing with things larger than business contracts, larger than bank and financial transactions, right? Larger than real estate plots. They're dealing with a metaphysical aspect of history, which is not going to be overcome, which is not going to be outdone by paying large sums of money or hiring the right lawyers or just waiting out somebody, for them to retire. All the things that made them successful commercially can be applied to a degree in this realm, but there's so many other aspects to this that he seems to be ignorant of, that I think eventually his success is going to run into.
What's happening in the West Bank as we speak? Has the IDF, for the first time, and I don't know how long, you would know this better than I, put tanks on the ground?
They have for the first time in 20 years, and they're focusing the IDF as Israel begins its annexation of the West Bank. They're focusing on four major urban areas: the Jenin, Nur Shams, and Tulkarem refugee camps, as well as the city of Nablus. I was actually just in Nablus back in November, and so today, watching the video coming out of Nablus of the armored bulldozers destroying the city, you feel that. You feel that, and the reality is that we're seeing is that Israel is focusing on the parts of the West Bank that have historically been the centers, not just of resistance, but of armed resistance. And what they're doing is they're massively displacing the population. At least 40,000 people have been forcibly removed from their homes. The Israelis have said they are never going back to those homes. The Israelis are busy destroying Palestinian infrastructure, at the same time building Israeli infrastructure. So they're busy throughout the West Bank, but particularly in the north and central parts, as far as I can understand, building roads, allowing their military to move, allowing the settlers to move, but also, too, roads, Judge, roads can connect people, but they can also divide people. And so these roads essentially demarcating new territories within the West Bank, new territories for the Israelis to occupy, and that the Palestinians are forbidden, of course, to be on their own land. So, the Israelis certainly, I think what occurred was that this deal we were just speaking of that Donald Trump made with Netanyahu, I don't think there was much arm twisting by Witkoff of Netanyahu. I think it was promises, because the way the Israelis are conducting themselves, whether it's on the verge of canceling the ceasefire and renewing the genocide in Gaza, the annexation, like we're seeing occurring in parts of the West Bank, but also, too, their violation of the ceasefire in Lebanon, their continued military operations there, as well as essentially de facto annexing large parts of Syria. Over the weekend, the Israelis said the only military that's allowed in southern Syria, south of Damascus, is the Israeli military.
Well, wait a minute, but that's a separate sovereign country.
Exactly, Judge. So the definition of a state, right, is the monopoly of armed force, of the monopoly on armed violence. And so when you apply that to southern Syria, who is the state then in southern Syria at this point? It's Israel. And so we're witnessing we're in quite a revolutionary period. Whether it's what Donald Trump is doing domestically, what's occurring overseas, whether it's the fact that you just had the incoming Chancellor of Germany, the largest economy in Europe, say his priority is independence from the United States. We're in a revolutionary period here. And I recall what Lenin said, Vladimir Lenin, not John Lennon, that over decades, nothing happens. But sometimes during weeks, decades happen. And I feel that that's what we're seeing right now, that 6 months from now, we might be in an entirely different world order.
Thank you, Matt. The very, very gloomy, sad picture. I mean, why does Trump do all of this? Because of Miriam Adelson and the donor class in the United States?
That's a lot to it, Judge. There's a lot to it that he, certainly you can look back and look at what he said about Palestine, Israel in 2015, before he was among the top contenders for the Republican nominee for the presidency, when everyone was still laughing at him and mocking at him and saying he had no chance. At that point, he expressed more of a neutral tone toward Palestine and Israel. But now, certainly he has that relationship with the Israel lobby, with the donor class, that supports Israel in this way. But also as well, he's surrounded himself by people that are Zionists, whether it be his son-in-law, whether it be his incoming FBI director, which will be a huge problem on the civil liberties front going forward. When your incoming FBI director said a couple months ago that the United States needs to prioritize Israel, as if the Biden administration and every previous president hadn't been prioritizing Israel, But I think he also he likes Israel's use of force. I think he likes Israel's dominance. I think he likes Israel's attitude towards human rights, their attitude toward the Palestinians, how they simply don't care, how they see those things as beneath them. And that is, I think similar to how he views himself. This man calls himself a king, right? Which is, I don't know if we've ever had a president ever do that, which is, I don't want to get into how, upset that makes me. But the reality is, I think what he sees in Israel is what he sees in himself. And I think that may be why he's so supportive of Israel, as well as for those other more pedestrian, transactional reasons.
Matt Ho, thank you very much, my dear friend. No matter what we talk about, it's a pleasure to be able to pick your brain and explore your insight. Much appreciated. We'll see you again next week.
Thanks, Judge.
All the best. Coming up at 3:00 this afternoon, right here, Lieutenant Colonel Karen Kwiatkowski, Judge Napolitano for Judging Freedom.